Welcome to the Meta Business Innovation and Technology Podcast. Conversations with industry leaders on new trends and products that can grow your business. In today's episode, we explore the evolving landscape of creative effectiveness with our host, Shekhar Deshpande, Head of Strategy, Global Accounts at Meta, and our guest, Jane Ostler, EVP of Global Solutions Marketing and Thought Leadership at Kantar. Shaker and Jane discuss the findings from an in-depth research collaboration between Meta, Kantar, and CreativeX, uncovering the most impactful creative levers that drive both short-term sales and long-term brand equity. They dive into how human connection, brand integration, and visual dynamism are shaping the future of advertising and what marketers and agencies need to do to stay ahead. Join us for an insightful discussion on how brands can create meaningful and effective campaigns at scale.
So, hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast. My name is Shekhar Deshpande. I'm the head of global clients marketing at Meta. I've been here about 6 years, and for that, my background is a global strategy director from the advertising industry. My work involves helping global clients get greater success out of the investments that they make with us, and we do a lot of work involving thought leadership, thinking about how advertising is working, how it can work better through categories, audiences, and understanding online platforms and things like creativity. And it is our huge privilege to welcome Jane Ostler. Jane is the EVP of Global Solutions Marketing and Thought Leadership for Kantar. She's also the host of Kantar's Future Proof podcast. But more importantly, I probably want to hand it over to you, Jane, to just say a bit about yourself. Hello and welcome to this podcast.
Thank you, Shekhar. It's a great privilege to be here and excited to talk to you today. My job is quite wide-ranging, involves thought leadership, huge pieces of data analysis that me and my team do, but also our solutions marketing so that all of our clients know, what we think about a whole host of different topics related to creative media, brand, innovation, customer experience, all of those topics, AI and more. I think one of the reasons why I think I'm pretty good at my role is because my background, similar to you, is also working in advertising. I've worked in digital media probably for longer than some of your listeners have been alive. And so I've worked in advertising, media agencies, and in marketing as well. So I think I've got a pretty good rounded view of what's going on, and also quite a lot of experience.
It was fun at the other event when we were talking about, the common people we know, isn't it? So that is fantastic. So thank you again for being here. But I want to pick up on what you said just now at the end. It's kind of the best of times and the worst of times, exciting times. So much is being said in the last so many decades over this being the most exciting time. But this time, genuinely, it might be different and more exciting with more fun, more challenges. How do you see it? Give us a picture of that.
Yeah, I think what we've seen over the last few years certainly is obviously an acceleration of change with digital platforms, digital formats, different ways of doing media planning and buying, different techniques that you can evolve and to create content. It's all super exciting. And obviously, marketers specifically get really excited about change and love to leap on to the next new thing. It's all good news. But there's other things going on as well in the background, right? So we have economic uncertainty. Is quite difficult for some brands to find growth nowadays. And that's a real challenge for marketers. Where to invest optimally, is not guesswork anymore. We all have access to a whole host of data that we can use. But what's important and what drives real consumer change is what marketers need to take note of. So they need to reach more people. They need to predispose more people. And there are new ways of doing it now. In addition to that, the old rules still apply about how you persuade people, how you change their minds about something, how you get them to like your brand a little bit more. And we can measure a whole host of more things as well. So we can measure emotion in advertising. But the thing that marketers also need to be cognizant of, and their agencies, obviously, is that every platform is different. It's not like you have a clear set of rules that apply everywhere. Obviously, the foundations apply, but every platform is different. The user experience is different. And brands need to somehow, through all of this, maintain consistency, be recognizable, and leverage their assets in the right way. So from all of this data, including new techniques like AI, generative AI, how should marketers create insights? What are the new rules that they should follow? And to the topic today, how do they create meaningful creative work at scale, at speed, that really does resonate with consumers and drives, sales today, but also drives brand equity, which sounds a very vague term, but actually it really means how do you keep your base sales and how do you create sales for tomorrow as well? So there's a lot going on.
You mentioned doing meaningful creative, and that is absolutely spot on. Because even we in our own work, we find that, for instance, if you look at how you not only create for consumers, but increasingly create so that our algorithms can maximize the effectiveness of the dollars that clients are spending, and we are increasingly finding that creative quality is more important than ever, because in this environment where the algorithm is trying to find the best ways for an advertiser to get effectiveness, the better the creative quality, the more effective the work is. And creative in itself in our auctions accounts for more than half of the factors that that are responsible for getting the best prices for advertisers, as well as for the advertising to be effective. And that's fascinating. And obviously, we'll come on to talking about our latest bit of research that we have done. Do you also find that creative quality, for all sorts of reasons across the industries that you are looking at, is now more important than ever?
Well, absolutely. The thing about creative quality is it's the number one driver of advertising profitability that clients and their agencies obviously can control. So it always surprises me when, we've done research, some businesses don't even bother testing their digital ads. They don't even look at the process of the creation of those ads and make sure that they're optimized throughout that process. So if creative quality is a driver ultimately of revenue growth and brand equity, like why wouldn't you want to understand how it's made up and how you create the best type of advertising for your format on the platform? So, the other aspect that we have here is that, we're no longer in an era where everybody experiences a campaign in the same way. People will pick up fragments. They will see some large reach campaigns, which everybody might want to have a chat about, but they will also have individual, highly targeted experiences. So because of the targeting capabilities and the algorithm driving those views, those experiences, it means that the component parts of the creative campaign, the quality of that campaign, are actually even more important because they can provide linkage and recognition and therefore drive memories, which is what advertising ultimately is supposed to do.
And that, I guess, nicely brings us on to the importance of creative quality and how we collectively studied it and learned from it last year. So let me do a bit of an introduction for our listeners on what this study is all about and what this work is all about. It's headlined a new era of storytelling. Essentially, what we wanted to do is try to identify the best creative levers that have the highest correlation with effectiveness, both short-term sales as well as long-term sales. So we have undertaken a project with ourselves, Meta, with Kantar, and with CreativeX, our digital analytics partner. The three of us have tried to see whether we can identify these levers, and we wanted to do it in a way that would be inspiring to a creative team. Very often, especially from tech companies like ours, creative agencies think that we just give them a list of things not to do or a list of things that they should do and try and raise the floor but we were trying to raise the ceiling and through this project in a way that is more representative of a color palette and less representative of a list of instructions. And so let me just delve into a little bit of what we did. Now, we collectively first identified about 20 different creative levers that could be analyzed and that could be isolated, such as, is there a human being present? Is it a fast-paced ad? Does it have vibrant colors? Does it have supers? Does it have animations? And so on and so forth. And we isolated these 20. Once these 20 were identified, we worked with a bunch of our global clients across 5 different countries. We analyzed 1,300 campaigns, 1,295 campaigns, close to 57,000 pieces of execution that were responsible for over 13 billion impressions. And each one of these was tagged by CreativeX on whether it had any of these 20 parameters or not. So for instance, if it's got a human being present, that particular piece of creative would be tagged as human present. Now, once this analysis is done, all of this is then given to Kantar, and they have applied their methodology, and I'm going to ask Jane in a second to elaborate on it. But they have applied a methodology to correlate the biggest and the most important and the most impactful creative levers as far as both short-term sales are concerned, as well as long-term sales and brand equity is concerned. And I can't wait to talk about those top 4 creative levers.
Yeah.
But before that, Jane, could you just throw some light upon the methodology that you followed at Kantar, and then we'll get on to the levers themselves.
Well, obviously, we all collaborated very closely on this project, as you say, with Meta and with CreativeX. And with this data, essentially what we did was we applied some AI techniques that we have, but we also used humans to come up with these themes and the ideas for the research. So we used something called Lift ROI, which is our AI-driven analytics solution, which is a very advanced form of MMM, to essentially decompose all of these different levers and features, both individually and collectively, to come up with what actually does drive short-term and long-term return. Now, considering the number of data points involved, which is sort of massive, like literally you could not do this project unless you had AI. So we used AI to work through all of the different scenarios and to find out, as I said, which levers are more meaningful than others in driving short and long-term impact. And this combined with the collective team all working together on what the themes were, actually came up with, what we think are fairly radical findings. They don't give all the answers, but they give marketers and importantly their agencies some really big clues about what we know works. And it's what we know works in multiple countries, multiple types of brands at scale. So this is a large scale project, which really gives us some very clear direction, I think, in what constitutes good creative or high quality creative, I should say, on Meta.
And as you say, both on the CreativeX side of things, as well as on the Kantar side of things, the surprising thing about this and the fresh thing about this is that this kind of study has not been done before, in the sense that it would simply not have been possible to assign potentially 20 different tags on each one of the 57,000 pieces of creative, and then draw the kind of correlations that you just talked about, Jane. And interestingly, it's a kind of untouched by hand analysis and correlation analysis and the lift ROI analysis. And yet, I'm very, very thrilled and surprised to share here that the topmost of the 4 different creative levers that came up as the most effective was human connection. And this, compared to the average, was 81% higher in terms of correlation with effectiveness. So you can think of it as an 81% effectiveness boost. And what do we mean by human connection? when there is eye contact, when there is human presence, and when there is some kind of emotional reliability to drive higher engagement, those creative levers were the top most performing, if I can use that word, levers of all of them. And that had an 81% higher effectiveness. So for me, having been in this business for a long, long time, it was so interesting that in a totally modern digital tech-led environment, what lever comes up top? Human connection. So I
Yep.
was fascinated and really interested by it.
Mm.
Jane, what were your thoughts on it when you first saw that?
Well, I think it's probably something that maybe marketers and agencies might forget with all the sort of technology that's available to create images, to create video, and to create sound. That ultimately, this human connection is still really important, even if you're looking at it on a small screen, even if it's a short form piece of content. There is an intimacy which is required, but ultimately, this is all about emotional connection. And we know that's super important in advertising, even if it is on a digital screen and it's as a small or a short format. Emotional connection is, this is all driven by our neuroscience understanding. That's what makes the quick links between what the advertiser, the brand is trying to communicate and, how it resides in people's memories. And the other thing is, what was really surprising actually is that less than a third of the ads that we looked at across thousands and thousands of these executions actually used human connection. So there's a big gap there. There's potential for marketers really to improve their work. So, that was the most surprising thing for me, not necessarily the human connection element, but the so few people actually think it's important to start with. What was most surprising, though, like really quite shocking, was that less than a third of the ads, the content that we looked at, actually use human connection in any way at all. So I think there's a big gap that marketers and agencies need to fill, given that we know this is the most important way to drive effectiveness. Like, why wouldn't you use human connection in some way? It might be a bit of a temptation to do sort of quick and dirty or get things done rather quickly, but it's the emotional connection we know from our neuroscience work that actually helps consumers remember advertising and connect with it better. And if it has some kind of resonance like that, then it's something that marketers and agencies, I think, really need to take note of. It was really shocking.
We're looking at 31% adoption numbers across what we studied. And so the other way of looking at it is, of course, the upside, which is huge. There's lots of room on the top to incorporate this. And again, in an intuitive sense, it doesn't then surprise us as to why on our platforms like Facebook and Instagram, creators are doing so well, because very often when a creator is really talking about something they've made, something they're passionate about, something they're talking about, it's just them in front of the camera explaining a recipe or explaining their
Yeah.
point of view, and
Yeah.
and that's one-on-one, isn't it?
Yeah. It's full on, is essentially giving the illusion of eye contact, which kind of forces you to pay attention. And you see this technique being used quite often in, television programs and films. The fourth wall actually sort of breaking through and connecting directly is super important.
Let's move on to the second one of the four, which is what we call integrating brand and product. And this had a 46% higher effectiveness. So a quick little bit of mystery for you, which is this is 46% is the lowest of the four. Why is it coming second? We'll explain to you in 2 or 3 minutes. So integrating brand and product, you might think, is something as marketers we have been hearing about and learning about for decades, which is about the difference between a brand or a product being inside a story, somebody literally opening a packet of crisps or somebody working with a product, or even imaginative ways of bringing the product into the story, versus the product or the brand logo or the name coming on separately, externally, on top of whatever story that a viewer is seeing. And that we found it was, again, the fourth most important lever, which is at plus 46%. Back to you, Jane. What do you think this tells us?
Well, again, this is all interesting, right? But the key word here, I think, is integration. And if you think about, ads of old, the way, there was always a kind of opening sequence, and then you'd cut to a pack shot of the product a bit nearer to the end, and then maybe the client would argue the logo needed to be a bit bigger, and then you'd have some sort of terms and conditions across the bottom. You could consider that the product and the demonstration of it, if it's woven in a lot better, then everything that you have at your disposal, your brand, the identity, the assets, the sound, the colors, whatever tools that are used in these ads is more seamless, and it's more, because it's more integrated, it is more powerful. It's not just left to the end. Oh, it's a bit of a surprise. Oh, it's for headache tablets or something. It's integral to the whole composition. So I think, you know, again, we have new technology as well can help us do this in better ways. We also know from other work that we've done actually that if you use your communications to talk about the experience of the brand, it's a much more powerful way to communicate what consumers will feel when they eventually buy it and use the product or service. So using all the tools at your disposal to give consumers a promise, frame the experience for them, bring it to life, whatever category you're in, doing it in an integrated way means that the ad is more meaningful all the way through.
And it just makes intuitive sense as well. Now, coming back to the answer to the little puzzle or the riddle, which is why is the top one and the bottom one one after the other. The reason is that we have thought of these top four levers as intimacy levers and immediacy levers. So what do we mean by intimacy levers? The interesting thing about the mobile phone and the environment that we operate in is that it is a highly intimate media. It is a highly intimate device where perhaps for the first time we have the ability for a marketer or a creator to actually talk to the person who's holding the phone one on one. It is the most intimate device perhaps on which we are viewing ads as of today. And therefore, in order to leverage the intimacy that you have at hand, we find that the creative levers like human presence and integrating a brand and product are proving to be really, really effective. So the first kind of grouping that we have done is that of calling it intimacy levers, which are human connection and integrating a brand and product. The second kind of unique environment that a mobile phone presents is what we call immediacy. And the sense of immediacy, as it says in the name, is that we probably now have more of an agency on swiping through content that we don't want to see than we ever have before. Imagine walking through on the M1 or driving on the M1. You don't really have that much agency to shut off the ad. You could turn your eyes away from. But out here, actively, you can swipe away, or you can do the opposite. If it engages you, you can stop and pay more attention, and you're probably paying a lot of attention. So the next two that we found to be the top four levers are what we call immediacy levers, which is leveraging that immediate environment. And the number three creative lever that we found with that in context is what we call visual dynamism. That was proven to be 74% higher on the average index as far as effectiveness correlation is concerned. And what do we mean by visual dynamism? This is about fast-paced visuals, quick cuts, there being a minimum of 4 cuts in the first 6 seconds, animations, animated supers, and so on and so forth. And I would also argue that we are looking at a very non-linear story line here versus a linear way of storytelling. And that we found to be the second most effective lever, which is visual dynamism. And that helps us perhaps optimize our creatives for attention in the beginning, in the first 6 seconds, perhaps. And my question to you again, Jane, about this one is this how increasingly people are absorbing media now? Or is this an effective lever because it's native to the platform? What's your observation on it?
Yes and no. And I think one interesting thing is we've started to see some of these kind of faster edits, quicker cuts, shorter ways of telling stories actually kind of spill out into perhaps more traditional media channels as well, whether it's television or digital out of home. But these are digital native techniques, right? And we are used to seeing shorter edits. But even humor, for example, it all depends how you launch into your story and how you tell it. Whether you're doing it in 10 seconds, 30, or 2 minutes doesn't really matter. It's You can do a setup fairly quickly. You can introduce humor, emotional connection fairly quickly, and give the emotional impact that you need. And so I guess my advice would be brands need to learn how to use these techniques across all channels. I mean, including Meta and all the formats there. Again, neuroscience tells us that you can implant a memory in consumers' brains fairly quickly. So actually, all the techniques that we have at our disposal, and it's not just agencies, it's also creators. The availability of editing suites, how you use supers is getting more and more important now. Actually, in a new school way, not an old school way. And ultimately, it does say something about your brand. If you're using, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. If you're using fresh techniques and fresh capabilities, you will be perceived as modern and fresh. And it might be that you want to look at your target audience and see what communications they respond best to. But using these kind of modern tech-led techniques is something that marketers do need to pay attention to, but they need to make sure it's right for the channel. What works on Meta may not work on another platform. So,
Yes.
so it's about being different and customizing for the platform where you need to, but it's also about integrating where you need to as well.
Very true. And that's so helpful because, again, using a channel as a strategic platform to maximize effectiveness versus just using it as another platform for the same execution has a big delta in effectiveness, isn't it? And again, going back to the upside, this is a 37% adoption is what we saw. And so there is an upside in terms of there's lots of room for people to grow. On to our last one, which is the fourth one and the second one in our contextualizing of a lever for immediacy. And that's what we call distinctive atmosphere. And this had a 67% higher index over the average in correlations with effectiveness. And what do we mean by distinctive atmosphere? This is about color palettes, consistency in color palettes, using music to create a distinctive atmosphere for that advertiser, for that brand, to create a really memorable brand aesthetic. And I remember, Jane, when we were having weekly calls over all of these months when we were doing the analysis, you'll remember the first thing that all of us with background in advertising thought, hey, this is about semiotics. This is all about recognizing things before your brain has recognized them. And that was fascinating as well. Tell us more about that. What does distinctive atmosphere say to you? And what was your observation on that?
Well, I think it's interesting because when we talk about these sort of brand assets and all the tools that brands can use to create these connections with consumers, but also across the suite of content that they're producing in any campaign or content program. The key thing is that they need to be related to the brand. So we talk a lot about brands that need to be meaningfully different. And, ultimately, these assets that we're talking about, whether it's color palettes or identities or music or the aesthetic, they are a reflection or a mirror of what your brand stands for, what values it has, what they want to signify to consumers. And so it's not just the kind of meaningless, layering on of, colors and logos and stuff. It's actually intrinsic to what your brand is and what it's about. So really all of that is not, as I say, it's not a layer that's applied on at the end. It fundamentally is an expression of your brand strategy. And so, it's a really interesting time at the moment. We've actually seen recently a few examples of brands that have undergone identity changes and they've actually gone back to what they used to have because they realized it didn't resonate with consumers, which to me underpins the importance of researching and understanding all of these aspects. Don't go wild and launch something new without understanding how consumers react to it first. But the important thing about this atmosphere, this distinctive atmosphere, is it needs to pervade all your communications to link them together. Because as I said, we all have these sort of scraps of experiences of campaign. So it's not just what you need to do on Meta, it also applies to all of your other comms channels as well. And, the other interesting thing is how does that work in an, era where many brand marketers are using creators and content creators?
Yes.
Because, the risk is that you could possibly lose some of that distinctive atmosphere. How much of that do you put into the brief that you're giving to creators? So there's lots of questions it raises as well as opportunities, I think.
So true. And this one, again, going back to something that we've been mentioning on all of these, is probably the highest adoption rate at 53%. But remember that we are analyzing big global, some of the world's best known brands. And therefore, this is the one thing that probably got right a lot of the times. And one other thing which we both know that we observed and that study tells us is that there is value in diversification of the creative as well, doing different kinds of creative. So we found that when certain brands, certain campaigns were using 2 or more of these levers out of the top 4, their numbers were looking really, really positive and healthy as well compared to the average. So there's a case to be made again on doing different kinds of concepts, different kinds of creative work as part of the same campaign. You might have a creator campaign, you might have a product demonstration, you might have a very human story as part of that storytelling. And then not only people, but also the algorithms are finding it more effective. So having gone through these top 4, and I know that we've gone to clients and to the industry to sharing this, looking at it as of today, what do you see as the implications or the learnings from this study overall for us going forward for marketers? How can brands and marketers apply these learnings?
Yeah, I think it's also their creative teams, whoever's working on their creative campaigns, their digital campaigns as well. I think the first thing is to obviously understand what your objectives are. Also, probably recognize that all of this research that we've done as part of this program shouldn't be seen as a straitjacket or a simple checklist. It's neither of those things. It should be liberating. We all want to achieve campaign and marketing effectiveness because ultimately that helps marketers secure more budget for next year if you can prove that you're driving effectiveness and you're driving growth. So it should be a liberating factor in the sense that throughout the process, bear these points in mind, make sure that the way that you do them is actually effective. And, the data that organizations like ours can produce actually really, really helps the development story. So we can use all the tools that we have at our disposal, not only to look at the ad and how it performed in retrospect, but also to predict outcomes as well. And this type of research, because it's done at such scale, helps us to predict with, great accuracy what we know works and what doesn't. So I think, allowing the process, even though we know some digital advertising can be very quick turn, but making sure that there's an allowance for, development research, for optimization, for using AI if you want to do things a bit quicker, making sure that also you have it very clear in your head whether the ad, what the ad is expected to do, brand impact or short-term performance. And actually, increasingly, we know from other research that we've done that ads that perform well in either actually tend to do both well in both. So this gives us like another granular level of detail below. Like they're not necessarily quick wins, but we know they're shortcuts to greater effectiveness if executed well.
And that is so true. And we see that increasingly, speaking of testing and optimization that you were mentioning, that a lot of these learnings, we obviously have the privilege of working with some of the world's most sophisticated and best advertisers and brands. And they are adopting some of these learnings, testing them, doing A/B testing, looking at how many of these levers can be brought in and are effective, and doing before after tests, which is great. And a lot of these tests are with you guys as well. um, and of course, it means that going forward, we can learn from the fact that there's a lot of diversification of creative that is helpful. And hopefully the study has given us the ability and the confidence. If you were a creative team or a creative director, it's given them the confidence to feel that I can try out these different levers and feel inspired by them, think of new ideas that will leverage these, and have the feeling that they have the confidence that this is likely to be more effective than the average bit of work, which has been one of the really hugely gratifying things about this work, wouldn't you say?
And given that, back to the bigger picture, really, that we know that marketers do want to drive growth, they're driving investment in brands, they want to make sure that everything works to its highest and greatest potential, because, everyone's got budget restrictions, and, we all have sort of, relook at the budget halfway through the year. Ultimately, if we're all supporting effectiveness, marketing effectiveness, and we're all supporting driving growth, these are really pretty foundational elements, I think, that we've uncovered.
And Jane, any final thoughts? How do you see brands leveraging some of this work and the availability of greater AI-based tools at hand, both with partners like yourselves and others? What does it mean for marketers and marketing, maybe in the next 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, well, obviously, we're undergoing kind of rapid digital transformation in all parts of the industry, possibly even quicker than it's ever been, I would say, particularly with Gen AI. We've done a lot of testing of and looking at early stage advertising ideas which have been created by Gen AI, and then maybe, actually born with Gen AI as well. And, that in itself may be quicker, but is no guarantee of effectiveness. So the same kind of careful thinking
Right.
has to go into those processes, I think. But the other element that I think is really important is we are hopefully entering an era where actually research-backed sort of insights are actually seen as highly valuable at every stage in the process. At agencies, in my experience, have always been a little bit resistant to creative development research or ad testing. But actually, they should see it as a support and a foundation that helps them propose those ideas to perhaps a CMO or a marketing team, as well as, being able to optimize them live on platform in flight. But I think that the key thing is here that, we now have this amazing data at our disposal. And, why wouldn't anyone want to drive greater marketing effectiveness? Why wouldn't they?
In fact, you touched upon this. Our creative director, who was, as you know, on the core team on this, he's famously been saying that he has seen a shift from 10 years ago, where he himself viewed data as not necessarily his best friend, but now increasingly he sees data, and especially the kind of data that we have discovered here, as their best friend for creative partners, because you can get feedback uh, as quickly, more quickly than before. You can get the kinds of feedback using a lot of the AI tools that you could not get before. And that allows more room for experimenting, for thinking differently, for trying out different things and getting feedback very, very quickly. That's fascinating.
It is fascinating. I think also over the next couple of years, what we're going to see perhaps is possibly an even greater disruption or innovation, depending on how you look at it in the process, which is actually a kind of a more holistic view rather than testing or using data or AI at certain stages of a process. We'll start to see way more kind of end-to-end solutions, which will allow marketers and agencies on platforms like Meta be able to, take communications or different formats from sort of inception right through to feedback at every stage of the process. And let us not forget, a lot of this data is founded on kind of, real human insight or is
Yes.
predicted human insight. So this is not made up. This is actual proper grounded, validated research. So actually, marketers and agencies should see it as a huge opportunity, a creative opportunity.
What a lovely way to bring it towards the end, Jane, by talking about human beings. After all, marketing is, to me anyway, about identifying what people need and trying to persuade them to want it. And so it is about human beings as well. Before we go, very quickly, if you like the study and if you want to know more about it, you could go to adage.com. There is a fully available published white paper. So if you go to adage.com, you will be able to download it for yourself, and all of the details of what we just talked about are there. And that leaves me to say a huge, huge thank you to you, Jane, not only for obviously partnering with us on this, but also for coming on this podcast. So wonderful and such a privilege to have you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode on creative effectiveness and the future of brand storytelling with our host, Shekhar Deshpande, and our guest, Jane Ostler, EVP at Kantar. Remember to subscribe to our podcast to get notified whenever a new episode is released. And if you found this episode valuable, please leave us a 5-star review. You can find any resources mentioned in the show notes, including a link to the full research study on adage.com. And thank you for listening to the Meta Business Innovation and Technology Podcast.